The Sacramento Kings franchise is in shambles once again, and with the fire sale potentially around the corner, everybody's talking about DeMontis Sabonis, Zach LaVine, and DeMar DeRozan being the first players to move. But as far as I'm concerned, if I'm screaming "free my dog" from the top of my lungs for any player to end up on a championship roster this season, it's my dog Keon Ellis. As a player at the two guard position that maximizes the ability of being an off guard, knockdown 3-point shooter, while also being somebody who can be arguably your best perimeter defender, he's somebody that I think on a championship caliber team could be a really big difference maker for a roster that's looking to make a push this season. If we just take a look at the contract number by itself, Keon Ellis is in a situation right now where he is on a club option that was surprisingly picked up by the Sacramento Kings for a minuscule $2.3 million. If you really think about what they're getting from a value standpoint in this premium position, again, your off two guard is a knockdown 3-point shooter and somebody who has positive defensive statistics as a guy who's mainly going to be dealing with dudes who have the ball a lot in their hands. You're dealing with guys who usually, as the primary defender, you're going to be dealing with high usage perimeter shot creators. Keon Ellis is giving you high premium production in his minutes on the floor for such a cheap price. Now, the Sacramento Kings are going to lose him, whether they lose him in free agency as an unrestricted free agent this upcoming summer, or they have to give him up in the form of being an add-on to a trade. Likely, if you trade for Keon Ellis, because of how low his contract is, he's going to be somebody that has to be moved in pairing with maybe a Malik Monk, with a Zach LaVine, with a DeMar DeRozan, because of the fact that his number is so low. But he is a good sweetener for any championship team that's looking to try to add 3-point shooting. But don't let me oversell the numbers for you. One thing that I thought was really important when I was doing my research and looking into just what makes Keon Ellis a premium player on this kind of trade market where value contracts are so important. You can't necessarily build your 3-star lineup out the way you could once upon a time, right? Because depth is so much more important in today's NBA. So these style of players are not just growing on trees. You can't just pick up your Jay Crowders and your PJ Tuckers quickly anymore. You have to attach a million second round picks and a bunch of different things that most of these championship caliber teams, they don't have that kind of draft capital scratch anymore because they've already sunk it into previous assets. For example, the Milwaukee Bucks, who did trade like five second rounders to get Jay Crowder once upon a time. Those are now assets that they don't have to be able to continue to build around Giannis Antetokounmpo. For if you look at the statistics for Keon Ellis, starting even from low volume, 50% progressing to 41.7% on nearly triple the amount he was taking before. Takes a little bit more 3-point attempts, goes from 41.7% to 43.3%. And then last season, still around 4 attempts per game. And he ends up taking 3.7 attempts for 42.4% from beyond the arc. This is somebody who does not have their game predicated on getting to the basket very much. He's not going to get you free throw attempts. He's not necessarily a facilitator of any kind. He's just your full definition of a defensive stopper on the wing spot. He's somebody that's very similar to, and I don't mean this in terms of what his skill set is, but I mean it in terms of what his archetype is. Think of your Matisse Thybulle. Think of your Andre Roberson back when he used to play for the Oklahoma City Thunder at the peak of that when he was with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook, or maybe in a similar archetype, Thabo Sefolosha for that same team. There's that archetype of two guard. Avery Bradley's another really good one. Maybe that's a better name that'll resonate with people in terms of me trying to make it translate in terms of how valuable Keon Ellis could be. Avery Bradley, specifically his time with the Boston Celtics, but I think even in his short stint with the Detroit Pistons, he showed some promise. But let's talk about the Boston Celtics version of Avery Bradley because that's the one that a lot more people are familiar with and understand the upside of. Right, the on-ball pressure, the aggression on the perimeter as a defender, somebody who constantly is creating havoc 94 feet because he plays with good hands. He forces you to have to really have a tight dribble. He's somebody that plays passing lanes really well, so he creates deflection, steals, different opportunities to get out in transition and run, and that works for young teams. That works for teams that like to play up tempo, and that works for teams that need somebody on the perimeter to be a great point of attack guy. I think a great representation of how impactful a point of attack defender can be is the Josh Giddey for Alex Caruso trade. You can make the argument from an individual talent to talent perspective that Josh Giddey is the better player than Alex Caruso. Some would argue maybe I'm wrong on that as well, but I would say from a talent perspective, Josh Giddey as a facilitator is much better than Alex Caruso. His ability to get to the basket with his dribble is much better than Alex Caruso. But the point of attack defense that Alex Caruso brought, paired with the fact that he was just a little bit more consistent as a 3-point shooter, Josh is absolutely, resurrected his career in a sense by becoming a better 3-point shooter this past season. But this past 20 games plus the back half of last season, I guess you could say. But I think the main thing is that Alex Caruso's point of attack defense was so important, paired with his ability to be a connector. The fact that he's somebody that you don't have to worry about monopolizing the ball. And I would make an argument that although Keon Ellis might not be the same caliber of point of attack defender that Alex Caruso is, he's a better knockdown 3-point shooter than him. Again, the stats tell you that he's a 42% 3-point shooter overall, but he's also a 40 to 45% 3-point shooter on catch and shoot opportunities. That's a lot of drive and kick situations where if you have a big man in the middle who commands a lot of attention, your Nikola Jokic's, or I think somebody else that could be really interesting is Paolo Banchero for the Orlando Magic, Bam Adebayo for the Miami Heat. Like, they command a certain level of attention, maybe not necessarily all based off of their defense, but based off of their physical presence, right? You have to collapse two on Jokic to force him to give up the ball. You have to collapse two to force Paolo Banchero to give up the ball. With Bam Adebayo, you do not want to be one-on-one in the post area with Bam, who does have the physicality and the athleticism to make a lot happen around the basket, right? So you have to, there's situations where you have to collapse too, and having that guy that you can rely on as a knockdown shooter on the perimeter is so important. I think a different guy who maybe meets the archetype in today's NBA of what Keon Ellis can be is like a Jalen Suggs type for the Orlando Magic. How he is not somebody who's much of a facilitator for the Magic. He's not somebody who brings a lot of on-ball prowess in terms of being able to shot could generate for himself and things like that. That's part of the reason they brought in Desmond Bane, was because they felt like they didn't have anybody on the perimeter outside of, if you want to deem Franz a perimeter player, since he plays mainly the 3 and does bring the ball up a lot. They didn't really have anybody else they felt they could trust on a possession-to-possession basis to bring the ball up, shot create for himself, initiate the offense in a way that gets others involved. Like, Jalon is a great connector, but he's not a true point guard. I think Keon Ellis has been able to kind of take on a very similar role while being in the proper position as more of a 2 guard, with the main priority of, on offense, I am supposed to be a catch and shoot shooter. I'm supposed to be somebody whose hands is always ready, and somebody that's prepared to move off screens and different things like that to make the offense more open and help with expanding the floor spacing on the team. But on defense, my primary responsibility is to, again, be a point of attack defender, be the first line of defense, be the one that, if you have to deal with a Steph Curry, if you have to deal with a Jalen Brunson, if you have to deal with the Ja Morants, the Trae Youngs, Anthony Edwards, that's like the first line of defense, as far as having a guy who has the physical gifts, has the physical tools. Despite only being like a buck 75, he plays physical, he plays burly, he plays very well with his hands as well. Again, being one of the premier kind of, I think this is going to be a guy who's going to, when he goes into the open market this summer, someone's going to get a very favorable contract out of Keon Ellis where they're able to pay him, somewhere between 18 to like somewhere between 17 to 18 million dollars a year, and that's going to be an absolute steal of a contract for someone who's going to be getting a player who, unlike Zach LaVine, unlike DeMar DeRozan, unlike Domantas Sabonis, you can easily factor into your roster and factor into your play style without having to give up too much of your philosophical your too much. You don't have to give up too much of what your philosophy is on offense or defense to make things work with them on the team, right? DeMar DeRozan is somebody who needs the ball in his hands a lot. Zach LaVine has developed more as an off-ball three-point shooter, but he's somebody that, in order to really, really maximize him, you have to put the ball in his hands and allow him to initiate the offense. Domantas Sabonis is somebody who you almost have to build an offense around. You have to put a lot of three-point shooting around him because he doesn't bring that. You have to bring a handful of defenders because of the fact that you need more point of attack to make up for the fact that he's not the best defender as a rim protector on the back end. So there's more to have to manipulate for those guys as far as what you have to do after you trade for those guys. When you trade for someone like Keon Ellis, you could plop him into nearly any roster and his skill set translates right away. He can be a catch and shoot 3-point shooter next to guys like Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, and LeBron James. He could be a 3-point shooter that adds, still that same perimeter pressure on the defensive end to a team like the Houston Rockets or the Detroit Pistons. The Miami Heat play very up-type and tempo basketball. He could be somebody that, with the way he pokes out the ball and he's able to create deflections and things of that nature, playing next to like a Davion Mitchell. That's something where now you have this defensive oriented backcourt that can give you like 15 to 16 minutes a game with them grouped together, where it's just all gas, no breaks on the perimeter defensively, and you're creating steal opportunities and constantly getting yourself in transition where either you finish at the rim or Keon Ellis is trustable in the catch and shoot, that if you end up doing a 2-on-3 and you kick out the Keon on the wing, you can view him as a reliable enough 3-point shooter to get those opportunities and make the most of them on a game to game basis. So I think that Keon is just somebody that, again, he's not a star name. He's not somebody that's going to get talked about a whole bunch, but he's a guy that the stats and the tape tell you that when he does play, he's a very valuable piece. Something I thought was really dope is the Sacramento Kings Sports Illustrated site. They did this at the end of last season after the Sacramento Kings picked up um, Keon's uh, club option, and all of these, aside from ball screen navigation, which is something that, especially, if your lateral quickness is so, can be one of those things that really hurts. But if you look across the board, look at all those A pluses that are on there for things like steal consistency, defensive miles per possession. That means that's coverage across the floor. That's how much you're picking up 94 feet. 3-point contest is a B at 67%, in the 67th percentile. Stable steals per loose ball fouls. That's something that means that you're able to create opportunities by, when the ball is in passing lanes and things like that, you're able to come up with the ball. Your success rate coming up with the ball off deflections, deflections themselves per 75, A plus. Passing lane defense, A plus. Steals per possession per 75 possessions, A plus. Pickpocket rating, again, on ball pressure and focus on being able to attack someone's ball handling. That's at an A as well. And perimeter isolation defense, your ability to put him 1-on-1 against someone else and trust him on that island, right? There's only a handful of guys in today's modern NBA with the new rules as far as being able to protect the offensive player, where you trust them to be a real force on the defensive end in a phone booth defensively. And it's one of those things that I think Keon Ellis, he thrives at. And it's something that I think this team, when you have Keon Ellis as really the only true defender on the floor at any given time, because DeMar DeRozan is a below average defender or an average defender at best. Zach LaVine, average to below average defender at best. Domantas Sabonis, average to below average defender at best. And then at your point guard position, maybe Dennis Schroeder is more of an above average defender, but his inconsistencies as a 3-point shooter continue to hurt him in terms of how he fits on the floor. Russell Westbrook, below average to above average defender at best. Another guy who, again, doesn't bring much floor spacing. So now in any lineup that Keon Ellis plays in, he's both the best defender and or the best 3-point shooter on the floor at all times, with not much other spacing around him on the offensive end. So it positions him where he's almost like a 4.5 when you go to the offensive side, because he's primarily a 3-point shooter. And then on the defensive side, it almost feels like it's 1-on-5, because he's the only one that provides any kind of real consistent defensive pressure. Keon Ellis, to me, I think is one of those guys that I think is going to be a premier talent in the NBA. And again, I don't necessarily know if it's something where I don't necessarily know if it's one of those things where he just needs to be in the right place or if it more is just a schematic thing. But I think that if there's anybody that should be called about when it comes to the Sacramento Kings, Keon Ellis should be at the top of that list. Malik Monk is somebody that I think is going to be really interesting to hear what his trade value looks like as well. But as far as I'm concerned, outside of the fact that his contract is so low, of all the players that could potentially be moved by the Sacramento Kings at the trade deadline or before the NBA trade deadline this season, Keon Ellis might have the most upside of any of those players to bring a opportunity to lift a team from being maybe right there as a championship contender to being a team that we end up talking about in the Eastern Conference Finals or the Western Conference Finals, making a push. I really do believe that although the upside is not significantly there, I think the ceiling, I think the floor for Keon Ellis is so much higher than what it's been shown in Sacramento. I think a lot of people usually would say that about a team like the Sacramento Kings because they tend to stunt growth for a lot of players. The old joke is that the Sacramento Kings is the organization you go to for your career to die. I think Keon Ellis, unfortunately, despite being one of their best success stories, is become the next victim of the Sacramento Kings bad developmental system as far as being able to get the most out of guys once they discover a talent that actually can play ball. The Sacramento Kings will have to move off of Keon Ellis because they want to get something for him before he walks away in free agency this summer. And the question to you guys is, who do you believe should make the call to get Keon Ellis, and how do you think he would fit on that team? I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to say in the comment section down below. Doing something a little bit different with this video. I think I'm going to call it like Routine Jumper Rants or something. Just a chance for me to kind of talk about certain players or topics that I don't necessarily need, a full podcast worth. My niche audience will like some of the players and some of the things that I talk about. And this just gives me a chance to kind of talk about those things without having to feel like I have a whole slated show. Everything's a bit off the cuff. And just gives me a chance to, be more consistent about dropping videos and hearing you guys' opinions on different stuff going on around the NBA. But with that all being said, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for daily NBA content here on the Routine Jumper page. Hit that post notification bell so you always know when we're dropping new videos. And I'll see you guys later. Peace.